There, that's it, we're on. So first I would like to welcome everybody today and to thank you again for your presence and the time that you've decided to dedicate to this. For those of you who attended our first webinar last week, welcome back. We're delighted to have you here again today. If you missed our first installment, we're happy to inform you that the session was recorded and is now available on the YouTube channel of my research team at University of Lorraine, which is called IDEA. That's for Interdisciplinarity in English Studies, IDEA. And the link is available on the website of our project, Humanities After Humans. But you can also just type in the title of the webinar series, Our Extended Bodies Ourselves, and you should find it easily. Right, bit of housekeeping before we get started. As we did last week, we're planning to have the Q&A session at the end of the panel. And you can write your questions down in the chat box during the papers, and we'll find them and ask them at the end. Or you can keep your questions in mind and just raise your hand to ask a question yourself at that point in the session. Today's panel on literature will take us on an exploration of our relationship to those technological companions that we tend to make in our own image. And it will therefore touch upon the sense of strange familiarity elicited by those not quite human bodies. And I will let my co-host Estelle introduce our first speaker for today.
Thank you, Jan. So our first speaker today is Jana. She's a doctoral candidate in British Literary and Cultural Studies at Saarland University, where she also studied British literature and German philology. During her graduate studies, she held a scholarship by the German National Academic Research Foundation, and her MA thesis was titled Birth and Death in the Posthuman Fiction of Janet Winterson. So that resonates with the paper we had last week, from actually Jan's paper last week. And her doctoral thesis will focus on critical posthumanism in contemporary British media. And her additional research interests include feminist theory and the overlaps of literary and cultural studies with technology in particular. So Jana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Estelle. Thank you, Diane. And hello, everybody. It's very much an honor to participate in this conference. I will first share my screen with you and then get right into it. That should work. So I hope you can see my screen. Okay, wonderful. Okay, as you can see, I have slightly changed the topic of my paper, and it's now entitled Pass Me the Screwdriver, the desire for and deconstruction of the artificial female body in Ridley Scott's and Aaron Gazikowski's Raised by Wolves from 2020, and Janet Winterson's The Stone Gods from 2007. In the following, I hope to show why the inclusion of Raised by Wolves makes sense with a view to my topic. In September 2020, the US-American film production company HBO released the science fiction series Raised by Wolves. In the series, Amanda Collin acts the lead role of an android called Mother, whose outer appearance does not deviate from the looks of a young human woman. Mother's spaceship crashes on the surface of the semi-hostile planet Kepler-22b. The planet's environment is characterized by severe temperature drops, snowstorms, and radiated soil. Mother begins to work on her potentially programmed mission to raise 6 human children, an endangered species, as Father calls them, accompanied by the aid of her male counterpart, a generic service android model called Father, played by Abu Bakr Salim. You can see Mother and Father on my presentation slides. 5 out of the 6 children Mother and Father attempt to raise die of an unidentified illness, resulting in the fact that the android's goal to successfully establish a new cohort of human children seems to have failed. The first episode of Raised by Wolves creates the impression that the android couple, Mother and Father, are limited both in their technological and in their biological capabilities, since they cannot protect their human offspring from death. But then, foreign Mithridatic intruders, representatives of a human religious cult devoted to an entity called soul, arrive on Kepler-Trinity 2b, and Mother unleashes immense power resources suppressed inside her, which come to the fore when her family's existence is threatened by the external Mithraic settlers. Triggered by her encoded instincts to protect her human children, Mother instantly transforms into a so-called necromancer, a high-performance military weapon in the shape of a flying she-goddess, capable of forcefully destroying any living being through deadly shock waves and acid radiating from her eyes and mouth. In her necromancer form, Mother is a superhuman creature, resembling a hybrid between the bronzed figurehead of a ship and the machine woman in Fritz Lang's film classic Metropolis from 1927. I tried to capture it on my presentation slide in the screenshot. It's a bit dark, but I hope you can still recognize it. As the necromancer, Mother is distinctly marked both in appearance and in performance, but also through the submissive reactions of those surrounding her as an artificially constructed non-human, equipped with more than human powers to serve humans in bygone wars. Mother is distinctly represented as the other, while the main urge behind her deadly transformation is to protect her only remaining human son, Campion, against the fanatic invaders. Thus, her motivation is explicitly maternal, which seems opposed to her status as an android. Now I would like to connect the transformation of Mother's bodily form from a seemingly normal human body into a deadly bronzed she-goddess to the phenomenon of the Uncanny Valley, which was coined by the Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori in an essay in 1970. Mori's Uncanny Valley connects the notion of the uncanny, das Unheimliche, which was originally described by the Austrian psychologist and philosopher Sigmund Freud, to the emotional reaction by humans to humanoid robots. In particular, Mori coined the hypothesis that, quote, as the appearance of a robot is made more human, observers' emotional response becomes increasingly positive and empathetic. However, this increasing degree of empathy tends to cease when the robot reaches a certain point of similarity. Beyond that point, the response quickly becomes strong revulsion or a sense of the uncanny, unquote. Mori translates this notion of the uncanny valley into a mathematical graph, a graph that, according to his own words, quote, does not increase continuously like climbing a mountain, unquote, but is shaped by a deep valley in the curve, as you can see here. While the relation between the human likeness of an entity on the x-axis and the perceiver's affinity for it on the y-axis seem to be in congruence until the curve of the graph approximately passes the 70% mark, the affinity suddenly subverts into an experience of, quote, these all too human robots as eerie and uncanny, unquote. On the right-hand side, you can see some examples of artificial entities such as robots and also the Japanese Bunruku puppet, which is an artifact from Japanese theater that all cause us to experience this emotional response of uncanniness. Returning to the depiction of the character Mother in Raised by Wolves, I want to draw my first claim that Mother's different forms, that of a seemingly normal human woman and of a deadly necromancer, lead to divergent, if not contradictory, emotional responses by the audience towards Mother. While her necromancer form unambiguously categorizes Mother as a non and perhaps even a post-human figure, the spectators find themselves in the dip of the uncanny valley. However, in her daily attire, the viewers are seemingly nudged to empathize with Mother, as her only intrinsic motivation seems to be that of a maternal protection of her child or children, and because she seemingly does almost not deviate in her appearance from a human woman. However, after having witnessed Mother in the necromancer form, the character of Mother resultingly creates an emotional atmosphere on screen that oscillates between absolute eeriness and a certain harmony, if not definitely strong sympathy for her as a character at the same time. Connecting the figure of Mother to the aspect of the desire for the female body from the title of my paper, it can be stated that, again, mother's different forms and the audience's different emotional responses to her challenge the notion of mother's body as a spectacle, both sexual and maternal. As a necromancer, mother is frequently presented in flight mode, as you could see before on the presentation, with aerial shots captured from her bird of prey view, framing the vulnerable humans and creatures below her as inferior. From her elevated position, mother is staged as the spectator of the attackable human and non-human others, while her glistening body coated in bronze armor seemingly turns her into a divine entity. However, in her human shape, mother's body constantly challenges the audience's perception of her, as her body figures as a spectacle of complex, sometimes contradictory desires. At the beginning of the series, it is mother androgynous, hypermuscular body in the neoprene suit that infuses the undeveloped embryos with life and nourishes them into full-grown fetuses within hours. Mother's body is hence presented as both the container of advanced human biotech innovations, as well as a symbol of hope for the survival of the human race in space after the Earth has been destroyed by wars. Again, the audience is caught in a paradox, as it is forced to see mother's body both as a lethal threat and as a giver of life. It is only later within the series that mother's body becomes additionally layered with a distinct notion of sexual pleasure, specifically within a sexual awakening during which the simulated version of her original creator, a middle-aged white man, by the way, somehow impregnates her. Once more, mother's body becomes the spectacular site of multiple meanings, of sexual desire, of superhuman physical strength, but also of vulnerability and definitely of fertility. Simultaneously, her body also equals the most advanced weapon ever created by humanity. However, the conglomerate of projected desires and fears mother's body encompasses is torn apart, literally at the end of the first season, when mother gives birth to her non-human baby that carries the potential to wipe out all life forms on Kepler-22b. But I intentionally did not include a photo of that because I don't want to spoil you anymore than I already did. Intertwining the multifaceted representations of mother's body with Mori's concept of the uncanny valley, I contend that mother's body is staged as the ultimate post-human pendulum, oscillating between the two extremes of desire for and fear of the more than human, and in this case, the more than human female body. Thus, mother serves as the embodiment of the complexities the audience is confronted with within the journey through the uncanny valley. Effectively, the power dynamics involving mother are always in flux. Staged as the bloodthirsty she-goddess other, capable of world domination in one scene, her body becomes an emblem for refuge for both her human and non-human children in the next scene. The audience are forced to constantly ask themselves, does their preference lie with desiring her or with the urge to destroy her or it? Throughout the first season, Raised by Wolves continues to play with the viewer's expectations and desires, and thus with their position within the uncanny valley, with the result that when the viewers think that they have finally successfully passed through the uncanny valley and climbed up the curve, meaning that they have accepted the android's mother and father as equal and almost human-like characters, the series creates another moment of glitch regarding the android's depiction, and the viewer's emotional response of eeriness makes them stumble back into the uncanny valley. This excursion into Raised by Wolves foregrounds not only the ongoing human fascination with the exploration of the boundaries between themselves and their technological creations, as we are also will be hearing later in other presentations in this panel, I assume. It also highlights how the artificial body and the artificial female body in particular are central for the representation, the application and the negotiation of the concept of the uncanny valley in post-human fiction and film. Reaching out for my second example of fictionalized constructed posthumanism, I will now discuss a novel that is equally mesmerized by the notion of the uncanny in connection to the artificial female body, namely Janet Winterson's 2007 novel, The Stone Gods. I will restrict my discussion for the first part of The Stone Gods, Orbis, named after the imaginary planet the novel is set on. Similar to Earth, Orbis has been unsustainably exploited by humanity and opens at what post-humanist philosopher Rosie Braidotti has called the, quote, brink of an ecological disaster on an unprecedented scale, unquote. Consequently, only one option remains to ensure the survival of the human race, its journey into space and resettlement onto a new habitable planet. To ensure the success of this resettlement, a newly developed species is sent to spearhead the mission of exploring this new planet. This new species represents the ultimate merge between human and machine, and it is called Robo Sapiens. Human scientist Billy Crusoe, who is also the novel's human protagonist, describes the species of the Robo Sapiens as the first artificial creature that looks and acts human and that can evolve like a human within limits, thereby highlighting the evolutionary and unpredictable component of the human-machine hybrid's existence and humanity's success in intertwining engine power, algorithmic advances, and organic structures into one. The only Robo Sapiens the reader is actually confronted with is Spike, framed by Billy's gaze as absurdly beautiful. Within the course of the novel, Billy and Spike develop a romantic relationship, a relationship that is constantly challenged through Billy's metaphorical wandering within the valley of the uncanny, in which Spike's body becomes a central element of negotiation between the human and the non-human or the post-human. Although Rosie Braidotti argues that, quote, the human body strikes us as a rather old-fashioned anthropomorphic engine, not quite suited to contain the fast-moving intelligence of our technologies, unquote, Spike's creators chose to equip her with the design of a hyper-idealized and also hypersexualized female body, quote, green eyes, dark hair, olive skin, perfect because she had been designed to be perfect, unquote. Even though the novel leaves it to the reader to speculate if the shape of the human body is truly the most optimal form for a super intelligent entity to save humanity from extinction, the idealized female body distinctly marks Spike as a human creation and, more importantly, as a human male possession, thereby transforming Spike's body into an instrument of human oppression in the light of humanity's anxiety of having created a superior entity that carries the potential to herald humanity's obsolescence. Applying an additional layer of feminist reading, the novel represents Spike entrenched within patriarchal gender mechanisms, specifically within mechanisms of systematic sexual exploitation of the female body. Not only has Spike been constructed to save humanity from utter extinction, her physical appearance is explicitly designed by the male scientists to please her male crew members on the space mission. Spike, you are a robot, but why are you such a drop-dead gorgeous robot? I mean, is it necessary to be the most sophisticated machine ever built and to look like a movie star? She answers simply, they thought I would be good for the boys on the mission. So you had sex with spacemen for 3 years? Yes, I used up 3 silicon-dent vaginas, unquote. Spike reveals the paradox of her existence as a super intelligent human-machine hybrid. She is not only aware of the purpose she was constructed and designed for, and is thus able to assess her own status within a humanity-dominated hierarchy of beings. She also takes the role of a situational and thus seemingly external analyst at the same time when revealing the reality of her destiny to Billy. At the same time, though, she is not taking her chance of direct revolt against her oppressors. The novel leaves it ambiguously open for interpretation, whether Spike simply does not yet possess the power to rise against her suppressors, or whether, as a hybrid creature, she does not yet evaluate it as her right or need to free herself from her status as a sexualized female object. At this moment in the novel, Spike, as a Robo Sapiens crammed into a body that serves as a projection surface for humanity's pleasure industry, becomes a controllable female interior, a leashed pleasure object. The effect on the reading audience and on Billy is to find oneself within the uncanny valley once again, permeated by an eerie atmosphere caused by Spike's humanness in her post-human or non-humanness. Just like the readers, main character Billy Crusoe is constantly confronted with the question of Spike's categorization as either human or a clever machine. At the beginning, Billy perceives Spike as a highly intelligent object and an object of her sexual desire. Her perception of Spike gradually transforms, though, changing to a state of constant contemplation and hence oscillation between the two categorizing extremes, woman and machine, while Billy's desire for Spike, both physical and spiritual, only seems to increase the more affectionate she grows to Spike. Billy and Spike eventually become lovers, and Billy finally accepts Spike as the being she or it is, neither human nor machine, but an entirely novel species, exceeding the humanly established logic of binary oppositions. For Billy, Spike's body becomes the surface onto which she projects her desires as well as her anxieties. While Spike's body is the ultimate confirmation of her non- or posthumanness, it is also a sanctuary for Billy's feelings for her. Quote, I lay beside Spike and thought how strange it was to lie beside a living that did not breathe. There was no rise and fall, no small sighs, no intake of air, no movement of the lips or slight flex of the nostrils. But she was alive, reinterpreting the meaning of what life is, which is, I suppose, what we have done since life began, unquote. Billy's close reading of Spike's body, rhetorically emphasized in the text through elliptic clauses linked to one another by negation, highlight the absence of what Billy is trying to discover within Spike's body, namely signs of human vitality, such as intakes of air through the lungs, displayed by a moving chest. For Billy, the minimal and subconscious movements of the body, such as slight flex of the nostrils, in other words, the small anatomic and physical flaws of the human body, are the last niches of human inimitability. However, Spike refuses to display these bodily functions. Maury argued that our perception of human death is linked to our awareness of the inability of movement of the dead body. Quote, then when we die, we are, of course, unable to move, the body goes cold and the face becomes pale. Therefore, our death can be regarded as a movement from the second peak, moving, to the bottom of the uncanny valley, still, unquote. Resultingly, Spike's complete immobility should spark the emotional response of uncanniness in Billy, but Billy's perception of Spike's body in the light of what it does not perform, compared to a human as represented in the novel, does not evoke any uncanniness sensations within Billy, as Spike's body has become only a secondary factor of consideration for her in the course of the development of their intimate relationship. For Billy, Spike's ability to reflect about the senses of life excels her lack of displaying subconscious movements of the body that would complete her perfect imitation of a human body. Effectively, the intimacy Billy has developed within Spike allows her to overcome her insecurities or undecidedness on how to classify Spike and look beyond the dual categorization of human or machine. Hence, Billy exits the uncanny valley as it is of no more relevance for her in the perception of Spike, as binary oppositions become obsolete for the consideration of Spike's body. This argument is enhanced when eventually Spike's initially sexualized body becomes entirely redundant within the face of inevitable death on Planet Blue, the new promised world. After an initiated meteor crash aimed to erase all the monsters on Planet Blue, the planet's ecosystem collapses, resulting in immediate climate change. An ice age sets in. While Billy's own biological setup does not allow her any immediate adaptation to changed climatic situation, to the changed climatic situation, Spike is better equipped to adjust her mechanic body parts to the changed environmental surroundings. I forgot to include that quote. I'm sorry. I'm going to read it out. Spike said, "Pass me the screwdriver. What are you going to do? Take off my leg. I need to conserve energy." With the knife, she was already incising the skin at the top of her thigh. In minutes, she had removed the limb. Now the other one. In the quoted scene, Spike drastically inverts both traditional gender norms alongside with tearing apart the inseparability for humans between one's body and one's self-perception and identity. After Spike has used up 3 silicon-linked vaginas from having sex with male astronauts, Spike now intentionally deconstructs her artificial body to enable her survival, an action through which she deconstructs classic beauty norms of the female body humanity projects onto her. While the gynoid initially seemed suppressed by the patriarchal society, expressed through her outer design and purpose, Spike is yet able to transgress and eventually abandon these external power claims. Spike renders these inscribed gender norms absurd, not by resisting them, but by moving beyond them through the instrumentalization of her idealized body. Through the removal of her legs and other body parts, the continuing deconstruction of her body until only her head remains, she positions herself as the ultimate post-human being, a being that has moved beyond the, quote, social oppression from this binary split, unquote, between man and woman, between mind and an artificial, hyper-sexualized body. As Billy acknowledges, Spike successfully progresses into a sphere where bodies are only secondary to consciousness and the connection between species, while Billy at the same time represents the human, quote, fear of disembodiment, unquote, so the anxiety of the loss of the human body in the face of witnessing the body of the post-human other, Billy desires being taken apart piece by piece. Ultimately, it is Billy herself who completes Spike's dismantlement while reflecting on the time they shared together. Now she is what she said life would be, consciousness. She has sailed the thinking universe back to the line of her own mind. Nothing is solid, she said, nothing is fixed. Unfixing has freed her. I'm inside you and there is nothing to fear, unquote. Billy's use of the verb to free in relation to Spike's bodily deconstruction reflects on how Spike's self-dismantlement, a dismantlement which she was originally to face by the sentence of her male creators, grants Spike the chance to liberate herself from the male power claim once and for all. Paradoxically, Spike's voluntary disembodiment also leads to the completion of her identity as a post-human being. Subversively, by unmaking herself, Spike becomes a full consciousness and she turns her sexualized body into a thing entirely obsolete. As the completion of Spike's bodily deconstruction confers with the audience's deepest dip in the uncanny valley, as all of Spike is left is an unscrewed female head, Billy and Spike share their most intimate moment in the face of approaching death. Thereby, the Stone Gods turns Murray's uncanny valley upside down, revealing how the perspective of theoretical and practical disembodiment might pave the path towards an imagined post-human shared future. To sum up briefly, firstly, both Raised by Wolves and the Stone Gods employ the depiction of the desire for and the deconstruction of the female artificial body as a powerful instrument of negotiation of the boundaries between human and post-human. Secondly, the Stone Gods uses the uncanny notion and the imagery of the deconstructed post-human female body to create an imagined, encapsulated moment of intimacy where the human and the post-human can meet and merge, thereby providing a prospect for a potential co-inhabited post-human future. And thirdly, the metaphor of the female artificial body is constructed in both texts as a surface for the projection of desire and fear, causing the audience to be captured in the constant insecurity characteristic of the uncanny valley. To quote Lay, "The uncanny valley would not exist if a robot were indistinguishable from a human, because there would no longer be a relative dip in emotional response," unquote. In this regard, both Raised by Wolves and the Stone Gods serve as reminders that the parameters between humans and artificially created, potentially post-human entities have not yet been fully negotiated, and that we still have to make sense of the technological companions and enemies we encounter in real life, on the page and on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Oh, sorry, my computer just froze actually, so I didn't know if it was the case for everyone.
No, that's why we need 3 hosts.
Thank you so much for an excellent presentation. Do we have questions already? Can we go on with the questions? Or should we do the questions afterwards?
Yeah, I was thinking we would, go through the panel and then do questions at the end, if that's okay. So I think that there'll be lots of things, sort of issues overlapping, and you know, things to discuss sort of between the different papers. So
yeah, I have a question, so that's why I was I wanted to ask it. Okay, so our second speaker today will be Heike Mißler. She's a senior lecturer in British literary and cultural theory at the English department of Saarland University. Her main research interests include feminist theory, gender and queer studies, popular culture studies, as well as contemporary British literature. And her paper today is entitled Posthumanism and Ian McEwan's Machines Like Me. Hi, Heike, whenever you want.
Yes, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm sharing my screen. Okay, here we go. So we're going to move from two quite progressive texts about posthumanism to a much more conservative text on posthumanism. That is Ian McEwan's Machines Like Me. And the novel is set in a fictionalized version of the UK in the 1980s. And that version of the UK is not really very far removed from our reality in that it is more advanced technologically than our present, but politically it is in as much turmoil. The premise of the story is that Alan Turing is still alive and has helped to develop the technology needed to create humanoid AI with, I quote, plausible intelligence and looks, believable motions and shifts of expression. 25 of these humanoid AI are available for purchase, 12 of which are male and 13 female, and they're called Adams and Eves. The protagonist of the novel, Charlie, invests his entire inheritance in order to buy an Adam, and then invites his love interest and later partner, Miranda, to help him program Adam's personality. The novel soon turns into a complex love triangle between man, woman, and machine, in which the alliances between those three protagonists continuously shift, and the boundaries between what is and what isn't human, or rather what is and isn't humane, are explored to the point where readers are likely to doubt the humanity of all three protagonists. And it's this dynamic, that is the behavior of humans towards non-human life, but also of humans towards other humans, and how that in turn might influence our robotic others, that the novel explores. It's centered around two big moral dilemmas. The first one challenges any claim to human superiority by analyzing the differences between humans and AI in the relationship between Charlie and Adam. And the second one has a feminist dimension because it deals with a crime in Miranda's past and analyzes the differences between men, that is both human and artificial men, and women. However, once the second moral dilemma takes center stage in the novel, it becomes clear that the boundaries between human and artificial life are in fact less pronounced than those between men and women. The novel not only shows that both the AI and the female protagonist are subjected to processes of othering, but also posits that the idea that artificial intelligence with its deep learning is supposed to learn from humanity is an inherently dangerous one, as it is bound to reproduce existing stereotypes, injustices, and inequalities. My paper will first outline the novel's post-humanist approach, and then in a second step demonstrate in how far I think this approach is flawed, as it fails to convincingly challenge any binaries and the notion of a humanist norm marked as male. So we'll begin with Adam's post-humanity. Machines Like Me uses a first-person narrative, which invites the readers to take the protagonist's perspective. In an interview, McEwan explained this choice as follows: "My understanding of this was to get away from a world in which robots are taken for granted and actually get a sense of first contact and persuade the reader to be in the same position as the narrator. Is this a real consciousness, or is it just a very clever set of algorithms?" So even if the readers might not be able to identify with the protagonist, they're supposed to ask themselves the same questions that arise when living with a humanoid AI. And all of these questions obviously evoke classic debates from post-humanist theory about the definition of human life in contrast to non-human life. And they are expressed in the protagonist's deliberations about Adam's status as a moral person deserving of human rights. The novel constructs numerous scenarios in which all of the essential categories that usually determine someone's status as a human being are interrogated. And this ranges from obvious things such as embodiment or the ability to communicate, to experience feelings and pain, and finally to having a personality or a consciousness. Adam is shown to fulfill all of these criteria, and yet the protagonist Charlie is torn about his humanity throughout the novel. And at first, Charlie has a very clear tendency to dismiss Adam as nothing more than the latest technological gadget. Charlie begins to change his mind about this when the technological gadgets spends the night with his girlfriend, Miranda, which is, of course, Ian McEwan's twist on the Turing test. So it's kind of like a sexualized version of the Turing test, so to say. At this point, Charlie's reaction is quite clear. I duly laid on Adam the privilege and obligations of a conspecific. I hated him. Even though Miranda plays down her night with Adam and doesn't understand Charlie's jealousy, she even compares Adam to kind of just a vibrator or dildo or something. She has basically given Charlie a definition of humanity that seems to work for Charlie. If he looks and behaves like a person, then as far as I, and that's Charlie, is concerned, that's what he is. It's at this point in the novel that the central question shifts from can AI be considered human to how do we deal with non-human but human-like artificial life. In the course of the novel, there are many more moments which test Charlie's acknowledgement of Adam's humanity, but ultimately they all serve to demonstrate the fact that the AI, so Adam, has a will of its own, a consciousness, and deserves to be treated that way. In fact, the novel goes even further. Instead of just confirming Adam's humanity, it portrays him as a kind of superhuman life form, one that is morally superior to humans. And this becomes clear in the novel when fictionalized Alan Turing explains to Charlie the phenomenon of machine sadness, which has caused the suicides of a number of these Adams and Eves. So according to Alan Turing, the difference between machine intelligence and human intelligence is that machine intelligence only works in a closed system and not in real life, because real life is an open system, messy, full of tricks and feints and ambiguities and false friends. And AI lack the ability to understand human behavior because humans are not rational nor logical. And most of all, humans frequently behave in a way that's not ethically correct. And so machines who have been trained to follow ethics are bound to struggle in our world. The political situation as it is represented in the novel is an interesting background to this, because just like in Brexit Britain today, in the post-Falkland crisis Britain of the 1980s, in which the novel is set, the politics of affect and of emotions rule the day, and rationality clearly doesn't win anybody any votes. So there's a nice little parallel to today. Alan Turing puts it like this, in fact: we create a machine with intelligence and self-awareness and push it out into our imperfect world. Devised along generally rational lines and well-disposed to others, such a mind soon finds itself in a hurricane of contradictions. So in brief, Machines Like Me seems to suggest that humans might be ready to live with super intelligent machines, but the machines aren't ready to live with us. The essential difference between humans and AI, as presented in Machines Like Me at this point in the novel, is human fallibility, or as Adam puts it, varieties of human failure, meaning that the machines are in fact better than us. At least this is what Ian McEwan also stated in an interview when he discussed this aspect of the novel. He claimed that we know how to be good, we have all of our religions, all of our philosophies, and all of our garden fence gossip shows that we know how to be good people, but we can't always be good people. This difference between human and machine intelligence will eventually seal Adam's fate in the novel. As soon as his moral superiority gets in the way of human happiness, that is, Charlie's and Miranda's happiness and their future as a couple, Adam has to go. Charlie and Miranda kill him. At this point, the novel's posthumanist project surfaces most clearly. Adam's death is clearly represented as an act of murder, and he is thus attributed human and less than human status at the same time. Machines Like Me, in line with posthumanist theories, thus presents AI as yet another category of difference, such as gender, class, or ethnicity, on the basis of which human rights are given or withheld, and livable lives are made possible or impossible. In order for the AI not to suffer the same fate as other identity groups that have been oppressed and discriminated against through processes of othering and dehumanization, a paradigm shift, as it is propagated by posthumanism, would be necessary, but it doesn't take place in the novel. If posthumanism's aim is to quote Bruce Clark, decenter the human by terminally disrupting the scripts of humanism, its core project is to challenge the construction of a humanist norm as predominantly white male European. According to posthumanist scholars like Rosie Praidotti or Manuela Rossini, this norm has helped to build hierarchical systems of domination, as well as taxonomies of the human, inhuman, and non-human that for centuries have legitimated and continue to legitimate the oppression, torturing, eating, and killing of beings not falling into the category of human. So to summarize the novel's answer to this first moral dilemma of whether Adam is human or not, despite Charlie's initial doubts, Adam's status as a moral person deserving of human rights is confirmed throughout the novel and by the ending's representation of his demise as an act of murder. The novel hence criticizes humanity's inability to live with difference, whether it's class, gender, or AI, especially if the life form in question appears to be morally superior. In that sense, the novel's posthumanist project seems convincing, even as it warns us that we are not there yet, we're not posthuman yet. However, the second moral dilemma throws this representation of AI into question and casts serious doubt on Adam's posthumanity instead, especially as far as his gender politics are concerned. So this is the second part of my paper. In feminist discussions about gender and technology, one of the key questions is in how far technology can serve as the goal of gender, gender equality, sorry. Cyber, techno, and xenofeminism have all asked if existing sexist and racist and classist and ableist and so on and so forth structures of domination and stereotypes are subverted or perpetuated by computer and communication technologies in general and by artificial intelligence in particular. Helen Hester, for instance, explains that xenofeminism seeks to strategically deploy existing technologies to re-engineer the world. At the same time, however, it recognizes that technologies are not inherently beneficial. Indeed, they are not even inherently neutral, but are in fact constituted by social relations. In other words, technology is only ever as good as the people who are behind it. Recent investigations, for instance, by James Zhu and Londa Schiebinger or by Caroline Criado-Perez, show that the quality of the datasets on which AI are programmed have a substantial impact on how well the algorithms work. Whether AI can help to promote gender equality hinges on how well it has been programmed and what data it has been fed. Both Zhu and Schiebinger, but also Criado-Perez's work, show that a data bias leads to sexist and racist patterns of behavior in AI. Now, Machines Like Me does not tackle this issue directly at all, in fact. The novel doesn't say which data sets the Adams and Eves have been trained with, only that they have access to the internet, which I guess should be a warning sign if you look at the state of the internet. But anyway, so Adam's understanding of ethically correct behavior especially as far as relationships, sexuality, and love are concerned, I think are marked by a patriarchal data bias. And this data bias is betrayed in the ways in which the alliances between the protagonists shift in the course of the novel. So for instance, it is Adam's assessment of Miranda at the very beginning of the novel, which prejudices Charlie and with him the readers against her. Because Adam has access to the internet, but also to privileged court records, he declares Miranda untrustworthy at the beginning of the novel. So he says to Charlie, there's a possibility that she is a liar, a systematic, malicious liar. And at this point in the novel, Adam has not yet fully developed his personality, so he's kind of like in AI puberty still. So his judgment at this point appears to be the result of objective calculations, the calculations of a computer, basically. So Adam even warns Charlie here, there is a small but significant possibility that she, Miranda, might harm you. It's interesting that Adam's assessment of Miranda is then put into stark contrast with Charlie's utter infatuation with her. He says, hers was the sweetest nature. She was kind, beautiful, amusing, vastly intelligent. Whenever her clothes are described, she usually wears, you know, pale blue dresses and holds up flowers in her hands when she goes to visit him and stuff. So I like that they kind of represented that in the second cover of the novel as well, as you can see on the slide here. So anyway, if you look at Miranda as she is framed by these two men, she's actually little more than a walking cliche. And this cliche is confirmed rather than challenged in the course of the novel. When Charlie confronts Adam about his night with his lover, Adam claims that he didn't have a choice. He says, I was made to love her. She must have had a plan. So Adam, the machine, basically claims his night with Miranda was he couldn't say no to her, basically, because she programmed him that way. And Charlie immediately buys into this explanation and agrees with Adam. As with Adam, so with me, she had wrapped us in a common fate. So both men present themselves as the naive, but ever so willing victims of their love for Miranda, even though they both have doubts about her integrity. Adam's explanation turns out to be wrong. Alan Turing later explains in the novel that the initial programming of the AI has little impact on their personality. Up until the revelation of the second moral dilemma in the novel, Miranda is thus represented by the narrative as either a potentially dangerous man-eating vamp or a bewitching and innocent beauty. The second moral dilemma is then first presented from Adam's and then from Charlie's point of view. Miranda accused a man of rape. He was convicted and sentenced to jail, but the press had doubts about the veracity of her claim. Being influenced by Adam, Charlie also doubts her. I didn't know what to believe about her, whether she was the victim or the perpetrator of a crime. It didn't matter. We were in love. The novel thus builds up an analogy between those two moral dilemmas, because just as Charlie isn't sure about Adam's status as a moral person, Charlie is unsure about Miranda's innocence, even though in the case of Miranda, he is willing to ignore his doubts. This parallelism in the protagonist's quest for answers is indicative of a common imagery. The dichotomy of female stereotypes in literature and film frequently echoes the binary representations of technology and AI. As far as representations of women are concerned, the best known example is, of course, the Madonna-whore dichotomy. And as far as representations of technology are concerned, the what Rutsky calls dialectic of technology describes stereotypes of technology as either inherently good or evil, which in turn then marks the narrative as utopian or dystopian. This analogy between a potentially dangerous woman and a potentially dangerous AI again suggests that AI can be read as a category of difference, just like gender, since they are both marked by their otherness. Andreas Huygens famously describes this dynamic in his analysis of sexuality and technology in Fritz Lang's Metropolis. He says, it's this threat of otherness which causes male anxiety and reinforces the urge to control and dominate that which is the other, whether it's a woman or an AI or a robot. But what's perhaps more disturbing still is Adam's enactment of his unrequited love for Miranda, which frequently transgresses the boundaries of what would be considered socially acceptable behavior. Not only does he write thousands of poems for her, only haikus, but still, he also asks her repeatedly if he can masturbate in front of her. Wanting to use her as an object for sexual gratification is questionable in itself, but the fact that she tells him no several times before she finally gives in and allows him to pleasure himself on the condition that he never ask again, clearly shows a very poor understanding of the concept of consent on Adam's part. Even if the act of masturbating does not do Miranda bodily harm, it must be understood as an act of exhibitionism or sexual harassment. There seems to be a contradiction here between the representation of the machine as morally superior and possessing a superior understanding of human ethics, and Adam's frankly disturbing behavior, which can only be explained by a flaw in his ethics. If Adam, as Turing claimed, is a rational machine well disposed to others, he should have recognized that his request to masturbate in front of Miranda was morally reprehensible and that he coerced Miranda's consent. The novel recounts this from Adam's perspective in a conversation between him and Charlie, and it even leads to a moment of male bonding between the two. So this is right after Adam confessed that he pleasured himself in front of Charlie's girlfriend. And Charlie goes, I felt sudden tenderness towards him for his trustfulness and vulnerability. I stood up from the bed and went over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. His own hand came up and lightly touched my elbow. So the fact that Miranda was used for sexual gratification against her will is used to strengthen the relationship between the two men. The person who is treated as less than human is Miranda and not Adam. This flaw in Adam's logic, or to put it bluntly, his gender bias, becomes even more obvious in his betrayal of Charlie and Miranda at the end of the novel, which results in his murder. He alerted the police to Miranda's crime because, in his view, all crime must be punished. The rapist's crime as well as hers. Symmetry, you see. Adam cannot classify Miranda's act of self-justice, so Miranda did falsely accuse the man of rape, but only to revenge her friend's suicide, and that friend had actually been raped by that man. So just to make that clear. So Adam just says, you know what? Miranda committed a crime, the rapist committed a crime, they both need to be punished. Symmetry, you see. He cannot classify Miranda's act of self-justice as anything other than a crime, and legally, of course, he's right. However, if he applied the same rigor to his own actions, he should have seen that his sexual misdemeanor was different from the rapist's only in degree, but not in kind. Both of them acted against a woman's will. Adam's inability to draw this comparison and to recognize the complexity of consent shows that his machine intelligence is biased against women. When he judges Miranda for her wrongdoings, the words he uses reflect exactly the kind of behavior that he is unable to recognize in himself. There are principles that are more important than your or anyone else's particular needs at a given time. Whether Adam's lack of judgment is due to his data bias or whether it is a reflection of the world that he is brought into, again, is a matter that the novel does not address. But it certainly suggests that deep learning, and hence the AI, can ever be as good as the world which produces the datasets and from which the machine learns. Hence, the novel's post-human proposition that the machine is morally superior to humans turns out to be logically flawed. So to conclude, due to the parallelism of the two moral dilemmas in Machines Like Me, the representation of artificial intelligence is deeply ambiguous. While Adam's fate suggests that humans are incapable of living with super intelligent beings because they are morally superior to us, the relationship between Charlie, Adam, and Miranda shows that it's not just humans who are inherently flawed. binary power structures between humans and machines, but also between men, whether they are human or artificial, and women, remain intact in the novel. Ultimately, the post-humanist criticism in Machines Like Me is compromised because the boundaries between man and machine are shown to be less significant still than that between artificial or human man and woman. The novel thus paints a bleak vision of both humanity and post-humanity, suggesting that as long as humans are unable to live with difference, we cannot assume that the AI we create will be able to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heike. Yes. Thank you so much for this clear-eyed and satisfyingly devastating reading of Machines Like Me. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our third speaker. So Jane Alexander is our third speaker today. She's a lecturer in creative writing at the University of Edinburgh, as well as a novelist and a short story writer. And her most recent novel, A User's Guide to Make Believe, came out just early this year. And Alan Massey's review of it in The Scotsman stated, quote, Jane Alexander taps into anxieties about data mining, privacy and technology, and spins a compelling thriller laced with paranoia. While this novel succeeds as entertainment, it's also one to make you think. So you'll see why we would want to hear from her. In 2018, Jane completed a PhD in creative writing, exploring the contemporary uncanny in short fiction. And her forthcoming projects include a collection of unsettling short stories about everyday and near future technologies. So Jane, if you'd like to take over.
Thank you so much. That's a really generous introduction. I will just share my screen. Okay, so in my paper, I'm going to draw on my recent practice research in creative writing to suggest how a contemporary version of the uncanny is a particularly useful conceptual tool for illuminating and interrogating the impact of technology on the body. The creative element of the practice research I carried out took the form of a collection of uncanny stories about science and technology. And the uncanny I was concerned with was the Freudian concept, defined insofar as this elusive concept ever can be defined, as a specific form of unease that involves the familiar becoming unfamiliar and unsettling, and which has to do with the return of something that has been repressed, so something which ought to have remained hidden but has come to light. And in working with uncanny fiction, I further defined the uncanny as a literary mode in terms of what it does. So an uncanny short story will unsettle distinctions between the familiar and the strange. It will destabilize assumptions of identity or of the nature of what is being experienced within the story, and it will create cognitive uncertainty for its readers. And among the findings that emerged from my research were that the uncanny as a literary mode has specific characteristics that make it peculiarly suited to investigating human relationships with technology, and that an emphasis in fiction on embodied particularities and a processual emphasis on embodied imagining as part of a writing practice can center the physical impacts of technology, thus constructing the body as a site of impact for a contemporary technological uncanny. The uncanny has long been concerned with machinery and with scientific and technological advances. 100 years ago, Freud's influential essay posited confusions between human and machine as a deeply uncanny phenomenon. And in fact, the very emergence of the uncanny has been connected by Terry Castle and Leighton Dollar with the historical Enlightenment, and thus bound up with a turn to science. While the uncanny concerns of key Romantic and Gothic texts of the 19th century were shaped by scientific and technological advances of the previous century, from the automaton Olympia in A.E. Hoffman's The Sandman to the galvanism that creates life in Shelley's Frankenstein. By the late 19th century, technology touched on bodies as well as minds, as Hilary Grimes explains. Bodies, minds, and machines at the end of the century had the uncanny ability to mingle together. Minds worked like machines, machines evoked and retracted physicality and bodily proximity, bodies touched machines to make them work, and machines tapped the workings of the mind, acting as the mediums for discursive practice. But however intimate this proximity, this mingling together of body, mind, and machine was not a literal phenomenon. Grimes again, humans work the machines, the oil from their fingers greasing handsets and switchboards, hair and skin follicles left behind as part of the process of connecting flesh and mechanical design. And yet the machine, despite its intense closeness to the body, is irrevocably separate from its human counterpart. Of course, this separation of human and not human no longer holds. As long ago as 1985, Donna Haraway argued that the future of humans would be cyborg, hybrid, and escaping fixed categories. 14 years later, at the turn of the century, N. Catherine Hales defined the state of being post-human as a perspective rather than a cybernetic condition, one that privileges information over embodiment, regards consciousness as peripheral to human identity, considers the body as a prosthetic that humans have always engaged in manipulating, so that biotechnological interventions are a continuation of an ongoing process, and anticipates the eventual merging of human and artificial intelligence. In these terms, Hales makes the argument that the human has already become post-human. And she says, it is important to recognize that the construction of the post-human does not require the subject to be a literal cyborg. Whether or not interventions have been made on the body, new models of subjectivity emerging from such fields as cognitive science and artificial life imply that even a biologically unaltered Homo sapiens counts as post-human. So conceptually then, human and machine are so intimately connected that they cannot be separated. And increasingly, this is also literally the case. Technology has become personalized and miniaturized. Virtual reality is in the process of becoming fully immersive. Immunosuppressants and nanotechnology have enabled an increasing range of transplants and implants. Bioengineering and gene editing are making it possible for bodies to be manipulated in ever more sophisticated and invasive fashion. In the 21st century, Gothic studies has begun to theorize a contemporary technological uncanny, characterized by Freudian tropes and often located in the borderlands between human and not human. Isabella van Elferen discusses cyberspace as an uncanny space, haunted by post-human agency and technologically produced doppelgangers, an uncanniness produced by virtualities, decenterings, and disembodiments. Anthony Mißler writes of a peculiarly contemporary sense of haunting that provoked by the loss of traditional bodily and locational references, by the pervasive substitution of the simulated for the real in the computer's virtual reality. That was back in 1992. And David Punter proposes several new forms of the uncanny, such as the uncanny of virtual locality, the increasing sense that the human subject is no longer located in a single place at a single time, and the uncanny of multiplicity, an awareness that earlier ideas about the doubleness of the psyche may now be radically insufficient as we emerge into a world where the individual, or his or her surrogate, may be occupying many different scenes at once, only one perhaps in the body, but many others according to the technological extensions, the range of prostheses available. So this is the territory I thought I would be exploring in my practice research. And indeed, early stories of mine do feature these effects and motifs, virtualities, decenterings, disembodiments. But as the project progressed, a more literal intersection of human and technology became evident in my work, in stories about physical illness, organ transplants, biomedical procedures and marketplaces. And in these later stories, an emphasis on how the body is affected by technology suggests that a contemporary technological uncanny may be one that shifts or extends the site of impact of science and technology from an invaded domestic space to invaded human bodies, and from exterior, social, psychological, and external physical impact to interior, biotechnological and biomedical interventions, personalized and internalized digital technology, human machine, and human animal hybridity. This would be a shift that continues a progression of the exterior to interior movement of the uncanny in the late 19th and early 20th century, from the fictions of Hoffman and Edgar Allan Poe with their supernatural invasions into the domestic space, to psychological hauntings, where the space to be invaded was not a domestic interior, but rather the interior of the mind. So I want to look now at two of my stories from my practice research that focus on human and non-human bodies. In the first, Flesh of Their Flesh, a daughter of a man who received a liver transplant from a bioengineered pig reveals how her father became sensitized to the presence of pig-derived ingredients in everyday items, a trait which she herself has inherited. The story asks what happens when we can no longer regard ourselves as separate from non-human animals. A central question is around obligation. What is our obligation to the animals we use as products? In this way, the piece becomes an exploration of technologically enabled animal-human hybridity and the potential for its empathetic enlargement of human identity. In the second story, Chronic, the emotional and physical connection between an invalid and an AI assistant is experienced as potentially healing. Boundaries between human and machine are blurred through the construction of an intimate, supportive relationship between the AI assistant, Kaya, and the invalid protagonist, Kath. Human and machine are aligned together, both apparently faulty and in need of mending or healing. When Kath comes to believe she could be charged with the energy from Kaya's power source by consuming her battery, this can be read as an aspiration to machine or cyborg status that might fix her illness. The story extends the reader's sympathy from human to machine characters. Rather than threatening human agency, here the gadget listens, responds, accepts, and has the potential to heal. The common trope of AI as a threat to human integrity is replaced by human threat to the integrity of the machine, as Kath dissects Kaya in an attempt to fix the machine and by extension herself. Both of these stories can be related to a third category of new uncanny forms as proposed by Punter, the morphological uncanny. Though Punter describes this primarily in terms of electronic media and their capacity to dissolve a sense of physical shape, it also refers to the physical pliability of the human body. In my stories of the morphological uncanny, technologically enabled hybridities are experienced by the protagonists, if not as wholly positive experiences, then with a measure of ambivalence. But when I came to contextualize my creative work with other contemporary short stories featuring a morphological uncanny, I found a really striking contrast. So China Miéville's short story, After the Festival, from his collection 3 Moments of Explosion, breaches boundaries between human and animal bodies, not via science or technology, but as the unintended byproduct of a celebratory ritual of sacrifice and procession, in a story that destabilizes the integrity of the human self and makes the familiar body into something strangely hybrid. Here, the intrusion of animal flesh into human is traumatic, presented as a kind of matter-of-fact horror, with invasive living worms emerging from dead, dripping animal heads. Descriptions of bodily fluids and rotting flesh show dead animals and living human-animal hybrids as abject beings. The characters' experiences of becoming animal are portrayed as compulsive, ultimately addictive and destructive of their humanity. Blurred borders between human and machine feature in 2 uncanny stories from Nicholas Royle's collection Mortality. In Christmas Bonus, art photographer Andrew Kerner is apparently transformed first into a human-machine hybrid before ultimately becoming a camera and tripod. The mutation of an individual human body into a piece of technological equipment is connected to Kerner's attempt to bury the memory of his former lover, Anya, by burning photo negatives of a model who acts as Anya's double. What Kerner tries to repress returns as a series of images of Anya that accompany his transformation into a machine. Here, the impact of technology on the body is to erase the qualities that make Kerner human. Emotion drained from him like moisture from a corpse in the sand. He sensed his memories fading like reverse Polaroids, and despite a general low-level ache, he no longer felt any real pain. This loss of humanity is something he passively accepts, seemingly without making a choice to do so. And a second story, Negatives, similarly destabilizes the boundaries between human and machine, with the protagonist's extensive use of an old green text computer screen, creating an optical illusion in which white becomes red. The screen technology invades his vision so that white road markings become red lines, headlights become brake lights, ultimately causing a car crash in which she is killed. So evidently in all three of these stories, hybridity is constructed as threat and experienced as invasion or erasure. What accounts for the capacity of an uncanny literary mode to illuminate horrific, threatening ways in which human bodily integrity is troubled by science and technology, as in these stories by Royal and Mieville, and also to offer a more ambivalent and even positive unsettling of our relationship with technology, is the liminal position of uncanny affect on a spectrum of emotions, described by Samuel Weber as located between dread, terror, and panic on the one side, and uneasiness and anticipation on the other. And it's this positioning between what disturbs us and what provides a frisson of excitement or pleasure that makes the uncanny such a valuable conceptual tool for investigating contemporary experiences of technology. We can see how it maps onto Hales's notion of a shift from the human to the post-human, which both evokes terror and excites pleasure. And Van Elferen's conception of the uncanny as an effect bound up with the same radical ambivalence that characterizes our contradictory response to the technologies we inhabit and which increasingly inhabit us. Van Elferen says, all of our worries regarding technological transcendency then are accompanied by curiosity and eagerness, and our fascination is accompanied by suspicion and dread. There seems to be no unambivalent emotional or intellectual way of approaching it, and that makes it eerie. So I want to finish this paper by briefly examining a couple of ways in which creative writing as practice research relates to Rosi Brodotti's proposed criteria for a post-human critical theory in the humanities, and by suggesting that one of the values of writing fiction as research is its inherent capacity to attend to embodied particularities. In an interview with Cassia Boddy, Ali Smith speaks about the process of creating a short story collection. She says, "The collections have all been made by sitting down and thinking, I need now to make some money and I've got 6 stories. And then to read all 6 stories together lets you know roughly where your mind is going at a certain time, with either form or what the material is doing. You have to listen for your own themes. It's a bit like listening to music. It's a bit like listening to see where a theme is, or what it's doing, or whether there is one." And this notion of building a critical mass work that can make audible trends in form and theme accords with my own experience of reviewing the first half of the stories composed for my practice research collection and identifying a recurrence of themes and formal strategies I had not consciously chosen to explore or deploy. And this may be a form of knowledge production that's specific to practice research, a process of discovery that allows for indeterminacy and emergence, with new knowledge becoming evident through accumulation and meaning tending to emerge through repeating patterns within a body of work. It's also precisely the kind of non-linear scholarly practice Bradotti advocates as part of a post-human critical theory, and which she describes as a method that replaces linearity with a more rhizomatic style of thinking that allows for multiple connections and lines of interaction, and which can better interrogate the complexities of contemporary science and our globalized distributed economy. Centrally important also to Brodotti's methodology of the post-human humanities are what she terms the powers of affect, memory, and imagination, which she argues are necessary to empower the actualization of virtual possibilities. These powers of affect, memory, and imagination are of fundamental importance in creative writing. And further, I want to suggest that Brodotti's actualization of virtual possibilities implies a transformation from abstract to concrete, something that is a central tenet of contemporary fiction, where the particular tends to be more telling than the general, the concrete than the abstract, and what's fully imagined and embodied than what's merely reported. In this sense, creative writing is itself an embodied practice. Natalie Goldberg offers this advice on improving as a writer. You are thinking on the level of discursive thought, but real writing comes from the whole body. My own writing practice is fundamentally to do with the concrete, the specific, and the use of sensory detail to invite readerly empathy and identification with the experiences of my characters. And before this readerly empathy comes that of the writer, an embodied experience of imaginative identification, described by Helene Cixous from her perspective as a writer of fiction. I become, I inhabit, I enter. Inhabiting someone, I can feel myself traversed by that person's initiatives and actions. So inhabiting a fictional physicality can involve both literal and imagined physical action in what I term embodied practice. This capacity of literature for specific embodiment is recognized by Hales. In her study of what it means to be posthuman, she includes analyses of literary texts in order to, in her words, entangle abstract form and material particularity, as part of her strategy to challenge what she perceives as liberal humanist and posthuman privileging of abstract notions of the body over the individual specifics of embodiment. She says, literary texts do more than explore the cultural implications of scientific theories and technological artifacts. Embedding ideas and artifacts in the situated specificities of narrative, the literary texts give these ideas and artifacts a local habitation and a name through discursive formulations whose effects are specific to that textual body. The literary texts, with their fashionings of embodied particularities, are crucial. And it is this embodied imagining on the part of the practice researcher that can position individual bodies, whether wholly human or something more hybrid, as central to the research, giving form to anxieties and anticipations about the physical impacts of technology, and through the particularities of individual embodiment, paradoxically, reaching to explore conditions beyond our embodied human existence. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Jane, for a really enlightening, absolutely fascinating paper. I'm going to, Sarah, do you want to do the question session, or shall I?
I don't think we have questions in the chat box, but Jan, you actually had a question.
I do have questions for all of our speakers. Shall we just open to the floor just to see if anyone has a question to start with, and then we'll
Yes, and you can either post it in the chat box or raise your hand and I'll let you speak. Raise your emoji hand or your real hand.
Okay.
Actually, I had a question for Jane, and because I'm going back, I have to go back to look after my little baby in like 10 minutes. So I'm just going to like jump in and do it now. Thank you, Jane, for your paper. It was wonderful. I was very interested by what you said about finding out that your short stories are very much, you know, the minority, and most short stories are, you know, like negative, etc., etc., and represent that sort of hybridity as negative. Do you see a shift? Do you think there is, because it seems to be that this kind of fiction is really what you study, you're looking at. So do you think there is going to be a shift, like showing more positive stories, or do you think you're very much going to remain in the margin? Or what do you see happening in the field of literature? Because that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think I would certainly really like to see a shift. I did find other stories of human machine and human animal hybridity that were much more kind of ambivalent, but they weren't necessarily in that kind of territory of the uncanny. So it's a story by Adam Marek called An Industrial Evolution, which is about human orangutan hybridity. And a story by Ali Smith, Virtual, which is about kind of an emotional kind of human relationship with a very complex emotional human relationship with a Tamagotchi, if you remember those. So it's not that there are none of these stories at all, but I think that there is a real, there's such a pressure of kind of received narrative around technology as a threat. And I found that in my own practice as well. It's a story, Chronic, that I wrote, emerged from a different story that I tried to rewrite 4 or 5 different times, which was about kind of a relationship between a human and 2 humans and an AI assistant. And whatever I did with those kinds of relationships, it seemed to fall into these really kind of well-worn kind of pathways of either, you know, a kind of an artificial intelligence takeover narrative where there's a loss of human agency, or a kind of narrative which relates, I think, to what Bettina was telling us about last week, where the device or the gadget itself becomes a kind of something to be kind of brutalized by humans, and it took me a long time to figure out a way to kind of evade that narrative. So I think there's just this real kind of freight of stories that push us almost against our will sometimes into a particular kind of a well-worn path.
And it's interesting that literature has this tendency to do that, and then if you spend time in Silicon Valley with lots of engineers, they have the opposite problem in that, you know, they think, you know, the stories you hear there, you know, I married somebody from San Francisco, and you know, the engineers that I speak completely lack this sort of, you know, wariness towards technology, you know. So it's interesting that literature does that, and then, you know, you go to the people who make that kind of technology, and it seems they don't really read those stories, you know. There's this sort of disconnect, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I do think that that the kind of literature that is able to kind of maintain a really kind of fruitful ambiguity in the relationships between humans and technology tends to be short fiction, because there's perhaps just a greater kind of a tolerance for ambiguity and lack of resolution in the short story form than there is in novels, which are much more kind of widely read and much more kind of culturally significant in many ways for many readers.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much. Do we have other questions? No. I actually had a question for all of you, or if perhaps it's more of a remark or something I thought about while I was hearing you. Jana, you mentioned Japanese dolls and Maurice Krahn's metaphor, actually, of the uncanny valley. And it made me think of Werner Herzog's latest scripted documentary. I don't know if you saw it, but it's called Family Romance, which is also a reference to Freud's book that of the same name. I think Family Romance and something, I can't remember exactly the title of his book. Oh, Family Romance, the Family Romance of Neurotics, which is about, you know, children who think that their parents are imposters, that their parents are not their parents. And so I was thinking about this documentary, which is about a rent-a-family business where people can rent a father, rent a mother, and that's a real business that exists in Japan. But obviously Herzog's documentary is a kind of hybrid between a documentary and a scripted film, and so this really made me think about these liminal post-humans. And I don't know if my question is going to be very clear, but I'm going to try to make it as clear as I can. Do you also look at these post-humans that are not really post-humans, but that are influenced by robots? I mean, I don't think that this business could have happened had we not artificial intelligence and robots. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear here.
Thank you very much for your question, and also thanks for bringing this documentary to my awareness, because I A, was not aware of the documentary, and B, not of this rental service, which I find highly disturbing, but also I don't know, perhaps a marker of Japanese culture. I think this is also very much something non-European, so to speak. With regards to Raised by Wolves, I would find, so I have just started to look into Raised by Wolves because the series only came out 2 or 3 months ago, essentially. But I think what you just mentioned would be very interesting to have a look at, because in Raised by Wolves, the idea between the idea of parenthood and the continuous question, are these parents really my parents, is evoked in every episode multiple times. Also because, I'm sorry I have to spoil it, but the humans that arrive on the planet have undergone some surgery and facial reconstruction to take the shape of human parents. So in a sense, so a man and a woman get new faces and they shoot the original parents of a human child. And that goes very much into the direction that throughout the whole series, this question or this notion hangs over this child. Okay, are my parents really my parents? Because they look like them, but they don't fully act like them. And indeed, this in the series, it's very much displayed. It is only available through humanoid androids that perform medical services. So I think what you just brought to my attention, I think it would be very interesting to have a look at that. And I think as a topic, it's also more and more explained, not so much in the Stone Gods, but in Raised by Wolves very much. And I think also this has something to do that with the fact that posthumanism also asks this fundamental question of, let's say, parenting through this classic mother-father concept. So I think it would be very interesting to have a look at that. I can't answer, I'm not sure if I could really answer your question in full, but the series has a lot of potential for looking into these non-traditional parenting concepts, I think.
Thank you. That actually answered my question, which was not really a question, but more of a remark. And we hate when people do that at conferences, when they ask a question and actually it's a remark. That's what I just did. But thank you so much for playing.
I have a question for Heike. I was really interested to hear that you sort of started off with this characterization of McEwan's novel as a conservative novel, and you very well sort of showed how, you know, that conservatism sort of lay in the idea of ignoring the data sets behind the AI and ignoring Adam's patriarchal data bias in this case. I was wondering, so I have a twofold question. First part of it is, does that suggest to you that the machine of the narrative itself sort of failed to check its own patriarchal bias, you know, whether it be the narrator or the author, you know, is there something there that's kind of reminds us of the narrative itself as not quite AI, but sort of as an intelligence of itself, of its own, that might also be flawed in the way it was conceived. And the second question would be, I don't know, it feels a little bit in the way you presented it as if that failure to check those data sets produces a sense that something's gone wrong in the depiction of AI, that there's something about the post-human that's lost there or fails to meet its potential. Does that mean that we sort of expect the post-humanist angle to be intrinsically progressive? And if so, how do we deal with this sort of insistence on a particular political stance? Because, you know, if we're talking about things post-human, you know, politics feels like a persisting, very sort of human agenda to me.
Yes, thank you for those questions. I'm going to try to answer the first one. So to be perfectly honest with you, like my personal opinion quite simply is that even though Ian McEwan obviously is an absolute pro, I simply think that he kind of ignored that entire story, right? I don't know what happened there exactly, and I don't know if he, like, I mean, I guess he should have editors who maybe should have pointed that out to him, but there's a bit of a logical flaw in the way that he constructs the AI. But on the other hand, of course, you know, you can always argue that it's precisely these lacuna in the text that actually make this meaningful. So maybe that was precisely his criticism, the way that he wanted to, you know, leave it open. I don't know. I'm obviously also shouldn't I guess I could ask him. Right,
It would be a very generous understanding of it, I think.
But yeah, so that's just my personal view of things, I have to admit. I simply think that Ian McEwan, I guess, just, I don't know, didn't think this through in a way, or if he did think it through, then it's just his way of, I mean, the same way that, for instance, I read an interview with him where he claimed that he decided to go for a male humanoid AI instead of going for a female humanoid AI. The reason for this was that had he chosen a female humanoid AI, it would have immediately, I think the phrase he used was, taken him into the realm of the pornographic, right? So yeah, so it's like, Ian McEwan, are you really not able to think of a storyline that does not, you know, does involve a female AI and not involve, but you know, I guess I don't know. I guess that's where Jeanette Winterson and Ian McEwan are just, you know, very different in their approaches, which is why it was so interesting to like look at your paper, because Ian McEwan also uses this trope of the parent. So the family thing that Sarah just asked about is in is a thing in Machines Like Me as well, where Adam and Miranda kind of, you know, are, or Charlie basically would like them to be a family, and Adam is the child and Miranda is the mother, and then obviously goes horribly wrong. But then there's also this entire backstory about the child that they want to adopt, and then of course the way that they deal with Adam is supposed to reflect the way, you know, the fact that they murder their artificial child in order to then maybe possibly have a happy future with their human and very troubled human child. That I think is an interesting twist in Machines Like Me that criticizes this entire trope of, you know, the like humans being the parents, so to say, and having control over AI. But this very much again goes into this pattern of representation that Jane mentioned, where basically the AI is always evil and, you know, wants to conquer the world. And anyway, but sorry, I'm rambling. Moving on to your second question. The question is a super interesting one, and I've actually also wondered that whether, I mean, obviously, the way that I read this novel is influenced by my interest in feminist theory. So, and if, I guess if you look at Ian McEwan's oeuvre in general, I wouldn't necessarily say that he's not a feminist, but obviously he's also got very problematic views in some areas. So I guess maybe my interpretation was also already led by my sort of background. But I do think that he did waste a lot of potential by creating a humanoid AI that just repeats human binaries, right? So there's no, like, the potential for creating a cyborg is obviously always there when you create stories about AI, or as Jane just so wonderfully illustrated in her paper, right? All of these hybrid notions. I think that is where I would expect to find more progressive representations and more politically forward sort of representations of AI. But I think with what Ian McEwan did in Machines Like Me, there's just no, I think there's a, to me personally, to me the novel was just a bit of, I don't know, yeah, as I said, I think he kind of wasted that potential by choosing to create a humanoid AI that reproduces humans so so closely. But on the other hand, I think that was precisely also, I mean, this then opened up other, you know, discussions. I'm just, as I said, not super convinced that the novel sort of, it evokes all of these debates, but it also does not give us a new perspective on them, or a politically forward thinking sort of perspective on them. And I personally, I guess, would say that I expect post-humanist narratives to be politically progressive, whatever that means. I wouldn't want to talk about the spectrum as in left and right or whatever, but I guess I would think of like more progressive forms in the sense that they go beyond the human and not just that they replicate the human.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
As opposed to just conservative in the sense of just reproducing what's just already there to be seen. Yes, that does answer my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, do we have other questions? Are we supposed to finish? Oh yeah, Jana, sorry.
Yeah.
If I'm allowed, I would have a question for Jane, because I found this perspective of creative writing and its entanglement with posthumanism super interesting. And the part I actually crossed out of my presentation was that Janet Winterson kind of employs a weird narrative mode in which the text itself becomes or tries to become a posthumanist entity, because it tries to form a network in itself. So it repeats itself constantly, it echoes itself, which you could also of course call intratextual, but at the same time it really becomes an organism of itself. And I was wondering if from your perspective creative writing can become an instrument, perhaps even against these biased data sets that Heike mentioned in her talk. And if you have seen or worked with explicit, not so much tropes that can create a posthuman sense, but rhetoric devices or modes, if you have experience with this, you know, a toolkit that creates posthumanity in a text.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I mean, I think in terms of kind of modes of creative writing, that so I think one of the kind of core kind of aspects of fiction that shares something with this idea of post-human humanities is to do with an enlargement of empathy, and I think that there are particular modes that I found recurring in my practice research that that in some ways I think might contribute to that. So a second person narration was one that I found myself using repeatedly, so much so that I started writing stories that I then had to rewrite in completely different narrative perspectives, because otherwise it was just going to be, there would be no sense of the unexpected as you journeyed through this collection of short fiction, and thus there would be no real sense of the uncanny. But I think there's something about the second person that can really sort of unsettle a kind of a fixed narrative perspective. So it's very complex in terms of the relationship between narrator and narratee and protagonist, and it can create a really fascinating kind of a combination of intimacy and distance almost at the same time. So at one moment you are absolutely alongside this kind of you figure of the text, you completely kind of insert yourself into that perspective, and at other times you're really kind of pushed out from that you figure, perhaps by something the you figure does, or perhaps by some specific piece of information you're given about the personal history of the you figure. And so there's a challenge there to the degree and the consistency of empathy that the reader experiences with the protagonist of a story. So I think that would be the mode that kind of immediately springs to mind that might fit the bill.
Thank you very much. Interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have other questions from the floor?
I actually have a question for Jane as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So I've only started getting into animal studies, so I was really interested to hear about your short story, Flesh of Their Flesh. And I was just wondering if in your creative writing, or also just in your experience as a researcher, do you think that there are like vast differences between the way that this animal-human hybridity works and the way that the human and robot or machine hybridity works? And I'd also be grateful for any recommendations sort of for stories that I could potentially use in my class on animals in British literature next semester. Maybe we could do that by email, but yeah. So anyway, the question is about the animal-human hybridity and AI human hybridity, and if there are considerable differences, or whether basically the animal, the AI, they function as the same sort of identity categories as opposed to the human.
Jane, you're on mute.
Sorry, always happens. One of the things that I've mentioned that's really characteristic of that kind of human-machine hybridity is that kind of threat to human agency, which I think is not so apparent in texts that I've read about human-animal hybridity. I think some of the most interesting things that I've read recently kind of form a sort of a triad, in fact, of kind of human, animal, and machine hybridity. So I'm thinking particularly of Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, where I don't know if you're nodding faces. There are devices which are animal in appearance, which are inhabited by humans, but which are actually machines. And there's something very kind of interesting there about, I think, what Schweblin is doing with notions of kind of control and again, empathy and kind of questioning the instrumental relationship, which I think is common across categories of human animal and human machine, but kind of questioning who is the product and who is the user of the product in that kind of context. I mean, I think that it's really interesting to consider the way that we can sort of rethink our notions of devices through a kind of zoomorphic approach rather than an anthropomorphic approach. So even something like a little kind of a robot vacuum cleaner that moves around your house, we might not think of that as a kind of having any kind of humanoid or anthropomorphized kind of characteristics, but we might think of it as a little dog or a little cat or a guinea pig or something like that. So I think that there are differences in the categories, but for me, I think they do often function similarly to kind of call into question the degree to which humans genuinely can kind of feel empathy with categories of being that are non-human.
Thanks so much, and also thank you for reminding me about Samantha Schweblin. That's been on my to-read list for a few months now, and I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, lift it up to the top of the pile. It's fabulous.
Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions? It seems like my co-host has, I mean, she hasn't crashed, her Zoom has crashed, but anyway, she's sort of getting back to us right now. In the meantime, if no one else has a question, I do have a question so I had another question for Jana. Thank you so much for that sort of depiction of the journey through the Uncanny Valley. I thought that was very compelling. I was wondering, and this is this is going to be very sort of lowbrow and very concrete, I think, a question, but I was wondering about your experience in that respect, and in that sense, this is a question that has to do with medium. In one case, because you worked on a series and a novel, and so in one case you have, the uncanny body has a visible shape, and in the other, obviously, the human and droid bodies are just creatures of paper anyway, and so they're to be imagined rather than seen. And so I was wondering whether that sort of tension between resemblance on the one hand and the absence of resemblance on the other hand, because it's just words sort of shaping something up that you're not going to see. I was wondering whether you had felt that created a difference in your response in terms of uncanniness or not uncanniness. Does the visible shape of the almost human sort of create more uncanniness or not? And as an aside, I was wondering whether Mother in the series was played by a human actress or just CGI, and whether that affected our perception and response. It's almost like one of those Shakespearean questions of just, females playing men, playing females playing men, and so on. Is this a case of, the real human playing a fake human who's playing a real human, etc., etc.?
Thank you for this very detailed question. And this is also super interesting because I've thought about this so much, how actually Mother's Body is turned into something that continues to give us the creeps through 10 episodes. So for me, the series lives very much from the visual depiction of the uncanny valley. So in that regard, comparing it to the Stone Gods, I would definitely claim that the choice of the film as a medium enhances the uncanny notion, at least for the audience, because the body, let's say, all these small signs, as I also quoted in the Stone Gods, these flecks of the nostrils, these small unconscious movements that for us affirm humanity and we lack in post-human or non-human entities, that you grasp much more as a whole on the screen when you see Raised by Wolves, because the actress, so Mother is played by Amanda Collins, so it's actually a real human woman playing playing a mother. At the same time, so this actress, I'm not sure where she was trained as an actress, but she mastered this ability to to switch between the uncanny, or it's between creating an uncanny feeling for us because of her movements, because of the look of her eyes. There, I honestly have not yet looked into how technical equipment supports this uncanniness. So this would be, let's say, a to-do on further exploration. However, the actress Amanda Collins constantly challenges us, because every time, the moment we think, okay, she is really much more human than android, she turns our notion completely upside down because of a small movement, of a small glitch of the eye, and that is really very, very masterly done, I think. And with the Stone Gods, I have to admit, of course, these are all, as you just said so beautifully, paper creatures. However, my initial response when reading about the deconstruction of Spike was very much uncanny, because this absolute deconstruction of the most, let's say, supreme and most beautiful creation humanity has ever invented is somehow felt like wasteful on the one hand, but also very much challenging on our beauty norms. So in that sense, I would say somehow Janet Winterson also is very, very much a master of creating the uncanny feeling or the body for us, carving it out very much in detail. But in the end, of course, the paper still cannot give us the full vision as on film. So I think there the medium of the film is very much a supportive a tool or an instrument. But thank you for sparking this idea with how the technological aspects might have supported it. That is, I think, super interesting to look into.
Any other questions? Bettina?
Yeah, hi there. It's a question for Jana and Heike respectively. And it's very similar to the first question. We had a question about a potential shift, I think, in fictions on androids. I was very gratified to sort of feel confirmed in my personal impression when reading fiction about female androids that it's almost always sexualized. I mean, I do sort of concur with your quote from McEwan that had it been a female android, it would immediately be pornographic, which might be a failing on his part. But honestly, looking at the corpus we have, he isn't all wrong, I'd say. I was wondering, listening to your presentation, Heike, and your interpretation, your excellent, of the text, and also Jana, your great talk. Do you feel that this maybe inherent association of female androids with sexuality, is that something we're moving on from in the discourse on these figures? or is that something we haven't overcome at all?
Maybe Jana has a little bit more to say about this than I do, because I haven't done a whole lot of research into female AI. The only text that comes to mind immediately is Ex Machina, for instance, right, where you also have this issue, I guess, where it's definitely played with as well. And I guess, I mean, you're absolutely right? This is always sort of, it's one of the #1 paradigms when representing female AI, that, you know, they're always sexualized. And I think that's where I think this tradition of like linking the representation of women and linking the representation of AI becomes super clear. And I think it doesn't really matter how far back we go, we've always got this alignment between these two identity groups, so to say, which is why I really like this idea of thinking of AI as just yet another category of difference, just like gender or class or race and so on and so forth, because I think this really sort of illustrates how in posthumanism, how the human works as a norm and how it's still constructed as male. However, what I found really interesting in Jana's talk, and I haven't seen Raised by Wolves yet, but what I find really interesting is this idea of turning around this parent metaphor so that the AI becomes the parent and the human becomes the child. And I think that is, Jana, correct me if I'm wrong, there's also this film, I Am Mother, which I still haven't seen. So I can't really say much about this, but I think maybe this is one thing where the paradigm is starting to change a little bit. I think the sexualization of female machines, unfortunately, I think is still dominant. It's still dominant, and I think will be for quite some time. I think this is just where, I guess, our popular media culture and literature sort of reflects what's going on, I guess, in the real world. So, but Jana, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Heike, and thanks for bringing up Ex Machina, because that would have also been my go-to movie for that question or that answer. My take on that is that currently, at least from what I've seen on screen and on the page recently, but I would really not call myself an expert. I've just started to dive into the topic, that we are currently in some kind of intermediate moment of change where there's more room for exploration of what can be done with female androids in general on screen and also in the novel. So for example, Blade Runner 2049, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the movie, where you have this AI, this hologram Joy, who is also very much still crammed in this over-idealized sexualized body and has no freedom to move around. So that I would call a negative example. However, when we look at, for example, Raised by Wolves, then you could see some potential of exploring beyond this traditional gender norms inscribed into AI. However, and I'm sorry again for spoiling, in the end of Raised by Wolves, we are very much overwhelmed by these very, very traditional biblical metaphors of the woman and the snake and the original sin. So I'm afraid it all collapses a bit in the end. However, so what I want to say in sum is my take on it from a literary perspective is that we're currently, there seems to be more room for experimentation. If it's accepted or not, I don't want to judge. However, what I see a bit in the real world, so I'm working with AI startups a lot at the moment, is that this idea of female AI as something different than a sex bot is not very, very far developed. So if you go over to Asia, for example, I think there's a whole market just living of these female androids being sexualized. So I think there is still some work to be done, but hopefully with the literary waves, it will come over into the real world. I don't know, but I think that comes again what Heike has said with the data biases. I think until the data sets are I don't know, overwritten. I think there's still some time ahead of that. And for that, the computer science departments would also perhaps need a few more female and other diverse researchers.
Sorry, I can't find my raise hand icon, but I just wondered if I could just jump in with a little supplementary question there about, it just suddenly strikes me that it's really strange that we are constructing androids in the model of male and female when there's no reason, no functional reason at all for them to fall into those binary categories. And I just wondered if anyone was aware of texts where androids are of non-specific gender.
I don't think so. What's interesting is that Jeanette Wintersnack actually works with non-specific gender and people. But when it comes to machine, it's, yeah. I don't think I can think of one just now.
Area to look into.
Yeah. Is your Kaya, is she female in the story?
Yes, she's female voiced. And so part of the story has her being aligned similarly with Kath in relation to Kath's partner, Ollie, in that neither of them can make themselves reliably heard to him. So it was important for her to be a female voiced AI because of that function. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what would happen with a male voiced AI in a story. I might have to try it out.
Do we have more questions, Jan? I can't see the chat box.
There are no questions in the chat box. I was wondering because Pauline appeared there for a minute. Did you have a question, Pauline?
Yes, sorry, like I couldn't find the hand emoji, so sorry. Thank you all for your presentation. It was really interesting and fascinating. I would have actually two questions. The first one would be like, considering what you just say, Jana, that so apparently you work sometimes with some startups, and what was brought before as well is like how can fiction and how we explore through literature and different narratives could impact and change the way we build up our technologies. So that would be that first, how you work with them and how you feel that you can completely change the philosophy of building up of artifacts. And the second one might be more addressed to Jane Alexander, because you just mentioned the fact that it was an empathetic relationship to artifacts, to some objects and animals that could be the same. And I'm wondering if you use in different ways, or if you make a difference between empathy that we can feel towards things and anthropomorphic projections we can have on them. I'm not sure I'm clear, but if you can answer to that. And like I'm really interested as well in the wide definition you use of the uncanny, considering that we can wider the range of objects and things we put in that categories, and maybe we can start a bit before the way we move towards future, something like that. Thank you.
So Jana, do you want to pick up that first question?
Actually, okay, thank you very much, Jane. Actually, I'm afraid, so I of course understood where you were headed, but I'm not sure if I understood the concrete question you had, Pauline. I'm sorry.
I'm really sorry. My concrete question would be like, how, like, first is like really curiosity, like how do you work with startup actually? Like how do you
okay.
how it's happening? And then like if you three are considering we could I don't know, like think about more I don't know, more dialogues between how we build up new tech and literature and fiction and imagination in the way we build up new futures in a way.
Thank you. That is a very, very important question, I think. So to answer your first question, I work as a let's say, business development manager or business consultant for startups in AI and cybersecurity, which means that I work with teams that consist 95% of men having studied computer science. And that is in itself very, let's say, telling, because it's of course a symptom of the study subjects and the ratio of gender in these subjects. So I think there, I think it will be a question of some generations until this is balanced, hopefully. So, and to answer you, so your second question is, I find super important, and I think their posthumanism could really be one of the perhaps pioneering theoreticals and also practical strands, because posthumanism essentially nudges us to work interdisciplinary, right? To look into computer science, to connect literary science with biology, with neuroscience, with whatnot. So I am not sure what would be a good framework for this, but I think having regular exchanges in which perhaps the floor is also open to people from different scientific subjects might be a solution. But then again, the methodology of these subjects is so different that it's going to be, again, very difficult. And I think that it's going to be one of the main challenges of posthumanism to develop some parameters that we can meet these people and talk on eye level, because that's, I think, another difficulty that comes in. Eye level does not mean eye level in all these disciplines. If you talk to somebody who studied computer science, might find literary science obsolete. So not that I want to push any stereotypes, but this is a question we get over and over again when people ask me, well, so you work as a business consultant, but you haven't studied computer science. It's a bit weird. So I think it's a long way to go there. But yeah, maybe we could employ posthumanism there as a framework and a platform.
And shall I pick up on that second question, Pauline? So you were talking about the difference, or if there is a difference in fiction between empathy and towards animals and towards animals specifically, or animals and machines? Animals specifically, I think, and anthropomorphism. And I think certainly in my fiction, what I would think of as empathy rather than anthropomorphism has to do with that kind of sense of becoming. So, so what Bradotti talks about, different relationships with animals, she talks about the Oedipal relationship with animals, which is to do with, it's the animals that we watch TV with, and it's our dog, it's our cat, and so on. And the relationship there often is kind of anthropomorphized, which is not to say that we can't have empathy with those creatures too. And then there is a kind of the instrumental relationship with animals, which is a more kind of product-based relationship. But can we think of ourselves as becoming more animal in some way, encompassing something of the animal, seeing something, trying to see something, and experience something in the way that animal does. And so in that story, Flesh of Their Flesh particularly, that has to do with the human taking on some kind of characteristics of the pig animal. And so I think that particularly it was important to have an animal like a pig in that story, because they're big, ugly animals who roll around in the mud. When you see them close up, fully grown pigs, they're not cute little, scrubbed clean pink piglets. So they're difficult to anthropomorphize. And so it's more of a kind of a challenge to the human to try to extend oneself into the kind of the experience of being that animal. And then there was a kind of another question. I'll be very brief because I see that we're kind of running right up to time, but I think you were asking about the notion perhaps of uncanny tropes and whether we're widening our sense of uncanny tropes. Is that right? Yeah, and so that was one of the kind of core things that I was looking at in my research, was whether, Fred Botting in Gothic Studies talks about the uncanny as having shifted, being elsewhere. And there's a sense that perhaps, that kind of uncanny phenomenon of a device that appears to be alive is that uncanny, where now we'll have, you know, Siri in our iPhones and Alexa in our kitchens and so on? Or is it's overfamiliar perhaps, and it's lost its ability to kind of provoke uncanny effect? And one of the things I found really was that the uncanny is always kind of shifting but staying the same, so that it will find new motifs through which to provoke that kind of uncanny effect, and they might be slightly different. So there's a Robert Planck says about this that you know, the kind of the golem of kind of Jewish folklore becomes the robot in later on kind of uncanny stories, and a really interesting I took a text to read about this. I've forgotten the name of it, but by S.S. Prower, The Study of the Uncanny, where he talks very illuminatingly about the intersection of kind of ahistorical and transhistorical kind of aspects of the uncanny. So that's really worth reading.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for what I feel has been a super fruitful, panel overall, but especially a very sort of very fruitful Q&A, and lots of, you know, questions and answers sort of going in all directions. And yeah, thank you so much for that. That was a very good way to end the week, I feel. Yes, and as to what you were saying, Jana, actually, I think that sort of gives us a nice sort of transition towards next week, in that this kind of forum between people working on or thinking about those issues in the humanities, and sort of trying to ask themselves how to reach out to the people who actually produce and design those technologies, and addressing that sort of divide. That was also part of what we were trying to address and think about in the context of this work. So next week, as well as Pauline, who works in communication, will be listening to 2 presentations by actual, quote unquote, actual engineers. So, you know, just people who are on the other side of that divide, so to say. And that was also why we, so we'll have 2 presentations and then that roundtable. And that was the idea behind the roundtable, was to have a more of a, I guess, a conversation, perhaps less of something that sounds a little bit less academic, of course, because we'll all have to sort of get to a common space that will not feel as scientific on any side at all. But yeah, that was the idea, to sort of create that common space where conversations can be started, if that makes sense. Right, so I think we will leave this be for now. Oh, sorry, people have been writing in the chat. I'll just read that through, just to make sure that we're not leaving anybody in the lurch, because I'd hate to do that. If you need to leave, though, please feel free to do so, because this was not necessarily meant to run on, and you all have lives to get to. Solène was asking about gender and artificial intelligence and androids. Maybe giving such female and male genders to them could be due to the difficulty of our society to recognize non-binary genders and the desire of their designers to make androids as human-like as possible. Yes, that does make sense. Thank you, Solène, for that contribution. Any chance of a bibliography? Mark, that depends on whether you want bibliography from the panelists, in which case I guess you can write to them to ask them. Otherwise, there is a bibliography that's attached to our project, Sarah's and Estelle's and my project, and that's to be found on our website, on our webpage, Humanities After Humans. So yeah, that's that for now. And yes, so I will now officially, I think, stop recording, and I wish you a very good weekend. Thank you so much for today. This was great, very rebarbative, and yes, very exciting. And yeah, and looking forward to seeing you all next week.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.